Well, I had all these plans. I had plans yesterday. I had plans to talk to you all about something completely different today about LSU football, where they're ranked per this ESPN article, and we'll get all to that eventually. But all of my plans, and I'm sure a lot of the plans of a lot of high school football coaches and college recruiting insiders, all of their days yesterday were completely uprooted when the bomb was dropped that Arch Manning is committing to Texas. So, what does that mean for the rest of this quarterback class? What does that mean for Arch Manning's future? And how does LSU tie into that? I want to break down all of that on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. So you can listen to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform, and you can also watch the podcast. You can throw the podcast, you can throw it up on your TV, or just watch it on the go on your phone. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page at Locked on LSU. I'm Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU a few years ago, and I'm now doing sports talk radio for ESPN 1025, The Game in Nashville, Tennessee. But I broke down a recruit of the week yesterday. I posted the podcast. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to go back and find it, you can find it on Spotify, YouTube, whatever your podcast platform is. And literally 2 minutes after I uploaded the podcast, after I got all done recording, I get a notification that Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Now, my first initial thoughts on that, I'm going to be completely honest, that was a little bit of a curveball in my eyes. I didn't think he was going to go to Alabama. I think that was obviously, in the cards just because of the powerhouse program that it is. We talked to a recruiting insider, John Garcia, about Arch Manning a few weeks ago, and he said that he wanted to go to a competitive program. Of course he does. He's the top quarterback prospect in the country, but he was also open to going to a program that was rebuilding. And of course, rebuilding is a very big scale. You can be completely rebuilding from the ground up, or you can be kind of in a coaching change. And I think that's what John Garcia was getting at, that Arch Manning was completely open to going to a program where there was a little bit of a shakeup, where there was a new head coach, where there was a new coaching staff. And so that's where I felt like LSU had at least a little bit of a shot, to be completely honest with you. I didn't think Arch Manning was coming to LSU. Of course, he's an in-state kid. Of course, growing up in New Orleans, he's just he's an hour down the road. But I didn't think that was going to be the right fit. He was high on Alabama. He was high on Georgia. I thought that Georgia was going to be the landing spot. He seemed very high on Athens as a college town. He seemed very high on Kirby Smart and the entire coaching staff. And I think that the idea of Georgia continuing to build upon the success that they've already had, I think would have been very attractive to him. And of course, coming from an SEC family, his grandfather going to Ole Miss, his uncle going to Ole Miss, another uncle going to Tennessee. The Mannings are an SEC family. So I kind of looked at Texas as the one school that was on the outside looking in. I didn't know how he felt about a program that, has incredibly high expectations, but has fallen short of them over the past, 5 to 10 years. Ever since the glory days in the early 2000s, Texas hasn't been back at that caliber that they have expected to be. So honestly, my initial thoughts were, wow, I was a little bit shocked. I didn't think that Texas was going to be the landing spot. But the interesting thing about this is when Arch Manning says he's going to Texas, he's going to Texas. He's not going to decommit. He's not going to continue to look around. He has the most privileged recruiting process in a couple different ways. And I want to get into also how he kind of gets the short end of the stick as well. But I say he's in the most privileged position for the recruiting process because he has every single resource at his disposal. Not only does he have the money to be able to, bring in whoever he needs in his camp to make the most informed decision and to set himself up for the most success in the future. He has two of the most successful NFL quarterbacks in the history of football. at his family dinner on Sundays. He's got Peyton Manning and Eli Manning, two players who made really difficult decisions, who had for their college decision, who had incredibly highly publicized recruiting processes and have also found a ton of success, not just at the college level, but in the NFL as well. So Arch Manning has had every single resource and brained pick and has had everything that he could possibly, every tool that he could possibly need to be able to make an informed decision. And the thing with the Mannings is, it's not going to be I commit and then I decommit, I commit and I decommit. Arch Manning is committing. He has been off of social media his entire life pretty much, and he started a Twitter and an Instagram yesterday just to make that announcement. He follows one person on Instagram, and that person is Cooper Manning. Yes, Cooper Manning. And so this isn't a publicity stunt. This isn't a trick to get, NIL money else somewhere. He is going to Texas, and he is fully committing to Texas. Now, I talk about the very privileged recruiting process that Arch Manning has had because he's had all of these resources, and that's the truth. But I think there's another side of it too that I almost feel bad for Arch Manning. And I think that's because of the last name that he has. So many people ask me, would Arch Manning be talked about this much if his last name was Johnson? No, he wouldn't. He's talked about this much because his last name is Manning. Would he have been so highly recruited if he wasn't a Manning? No, he wouldn't. And that's not a knock on Arch Manning. It's not a knock on his ability. But there are so many other five-star quarterbacks coming out of this 2023 class that you probably don't even know their names because they're not talked about on SportsCenter, because they're not talked about on every single offseason college football podcast or show, because this is Arch Manning, because Arch Manning is preceded by all of the people that you know and love. Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, Archie Manning, Cooper Manning, of course, his father wasn't able to fulfill his football career, but you know the name. So I almost feel bad for Arch Manning because the expectations for Arch Manning going into Texas are going to be massive. And I think they're almost higher going into Texas than they would be at, say, Alabama or Georgia. And I want to get into that. Exactly what are the expectations for Arch Manning going into Texas? How is that different than maybe another school that he could have chosen? And also, what does the future of the quarterback position look at the University of Texas? How does that affect LSU? And how does that affect the rest of the SEC? I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell y'all about betonline.net because it is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. I've got some betting tidbits for y'all at the end of the show, so make sure to stick around if you want to make some money on some baseball this weekend. Odds via betonline.net. But there you can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. They've got this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information. They've got live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events. They've got MMA, boxing, and golf. You name it, they've got it on BetOnline.net. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, our friend John Garcia from Sports Illustrated has been absolutely so incredibly busy the past couple of days, but especially yesterday. So we weren't able to get him on the show, but he did record a little bit of something for us. So this is a recruiting insider from Sports Illustrated. His thoughts on Arch Manning landing in Texas and the recruiting process as a whole. Again, this is John Garcia of Sports Illustrated.
They say you never forget your first, and the college football world certainly won't forget the first tweet fired off by the digital pen of Arch Manning. All it was a verbal commitment, not to the defending national champions, not to the program they just beat for said national title, but to Texas. Arch Manning is a Longhorn. His coach has already confirmed that his recruitment is totally shut down no more visits for the industry's #1 quarterback in the class of 2023. Steve Sarkisian, AJ Milwee and company in Austin upset Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, and all of the rings that come with those coaches. You got to hand it to Arch, paving his own way, going to the path less traveled. Yes, there's a clearer path for playing time, but certainly in terms of stability, in terms of development, resources, and recent success, Texas is on the up and up compared to Alabama and Georgia. So yes, the most famous high school football recruit in the last decade is officially off the board to Texas. No drama expected in between now and National Signing Day. And in between that, you should probably expect a lot more verbal commitments joining Arch in heading to Austin.
Again, that was John Garcia, recruiting insider for Sports Illustrated. We'll get him back on the podcast shortly so we can talk about Arch Manning and other recruits that could potentially be wearing the purple and gold next fall. But there are a few things that John hit on there that I would like to hit on because I think that this is a very interesting choice for Arch Manning because of what John just said. Your path to a championship is already paved at Alabama and Georgia. Alabama's won plenty of national championships with several different quarterbacks whose recruitments were much less publicized than Arch Manning's. I don't think there's any recruitment, maybe other than his uncle's, that were publicized more than this. But it's almost like I felt like it was Christmas morning yesterday because this decision that I've been waiting for so long has finally been made. I almost feel like I don't know what to talk about anymore now that Arch Manning is off the board. But the path to a national championship and the path to success is so much clearer and is so much more obvious at Georgia and Alabama. Texas's success has been up and down over the past few years. There's been plenty of controversy at the University of Texas. The expectations for the Longhorns are incredibly high, and the success of the Longhorns hasn't reached that. So when John says, congrats to him, kudos to him for paving his own road, I completely and wholeheartedly agree. This could not have been an easy decision. Arch Manning had every single program and every single school at his disposal. He could have picked anywhere in the world to go to school. And he chose Texas, which isn't the most obvious choice to winning. Now, of course, you have the resources. Of course, you have the money. Of course, it's not something that Arch Manning needs. I don't think the Manning family is short of cash. But there's all the resources, all of the money, all of the boosters, and all of the hype surrounding the Texas program, but not the recent success. And that's where I think the question of what are the expectations for Arch Manning at Texas and why are they different than maybe if he went to another school? And I think that there is this massive dichotomy of will Arch Manning's commitment to Texas, will the expectations be Arch Manning gets on campus and it wins a bunch of games and he puts this program back on track and he finds a decent amount of success at Texas, and then great, he spends his 3 to 4 years at Texas and maybe wins a national championship, wins a couple Big 12 championships or SEC championships, wherever they'll be at that point. That's one side of things, and I think that those are very fair expectations. But with all of the hype around Arch Manning, I worry for his sake that the expectation at Texas is different and higher than maybe Alabama or Georgia, because Alabama and Georgia have already had success and they have not gone off the beaten path of success. Texas has. So I fear for his sake that the Texas fan base views Arch Manning as the answer to all of Texas's prayers, and that Arch Manning completely resets the direction that Texas football has been on and completely sets it up for success for years to come. And that is a massive, massive responsibility to put on a 17, 18-year-old's shoulders, because I think it very well could be the case. There might be some recruits that Texas was recruiting very heavily, or maybe even recruits in the state of Texas that are now interested in looking at Texas again if they know that the best quarterback recruit in the country is headed there. Maybe Texas starts to pull in a bunch of transfers because they want to go play with Arch Manning. I think you might see a lot of players who have already committed to certain schools reopen their recruitment in order to look at Texas. And Texas could reel in even more 4 or 5-star players to play with Arch Manning. And then that sets them up for success, just beyond Arch Manning, that all these players want to play with him and want to be part of the success that Arch Manning could build in Austin. I'm not counting that out. But I think that at Texas, they're looking for somebody to steer the ship back into the right direction and, to get back on the path that they want to be in, rather than let's get the kid in, let's win some games, and let's win a championship. At Alabama, the expectations would have been, okay, Arch, you are the next quarterback in a line of a lot of quarterbacks that have won national championships here. Go ahead and do it again. At Georgia, it'd be the same way. We just won a national championship. We've won the SEC East consistently. Are you going to be the guy that, helps us get back to the national championship every year? Won a few games for us. Won a few SEC championships for us. The Alabama and Georgia football programs don't have catching up to do. And Texas very much so does. Do I think that Arch Manning could be the person to do it? Sure. I have no reason to not think that he would be the one to do it. If anyone can handle pressure, if anybody understands what's at stake here, it's him, because he has all of the expertise and experience and advice around him. But I think that's a lot on his plate. And I also look at, too, the quarterback room at Texas as it exists. Where does Arch Manning fit in? They were talking about this on SportsCenter the other day. This is Pete Thamel, an ESPN and College Football Insider, talking about Arch Manning and kind of his path to start at Texas.
5-7 last year, Pete. And so how quickly can someone like Arch Manning turn things around?
Well, it'll be interesting, Sage. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up redshirting. Remember, Eli Manning redshirted when he went to Ole Miss. Texas has a loaded quarterback room right now when you have Quinn Ewers, who was the number one quarterback prospect who transferred from Ohio State after last season. They also have Hudson Card and Malik Murphy, who are both high-end quarterbacks. So it will be one of the stiffest competitions. Obviously, the chips are going to fall how they do with those battles. But it wouldn't surprise me if Arch Manning went there. The Mannings aren't going to be in a rush because development doesn't always equate to playing right away. So, again, there's a long way from now until he arrives there, and that quarterback room could end up changing a lot. But his impact on the field may not be day one immediate because of the competition that he's going to face upon arrival there. It is a excellent high-end quarterback room.
And that's another element to this that I think is so interesting, which makes Arch Manning's commitment even more intriguing, is the fact that Texas's quarterback room is not short on talent. There have been 3 quarterbacks in the history of recruiting rankings who have perfect 5-star ratings per 24/7 Sports. 3, only 3. Arch Manning is one of them. Another one of them was Vince Young. The third is already in the Texas quarterback room, and his name is Quinn Ewers. He had the same ranking, a perfect, flawless 5-star, 100% ranking per 24/7 Sports. Same thing as Arch Manning. And Arch Manning chooses to go to the school with another quarterback who's rated just as highly. So I think that's a totally crazy aspect to all of this is, can you see, I just hit the mic. I'm sorry if that just startled you. Is Quinn Ewers going to transfer? If that's the truth, then who is on his radar? Who could potentially be the landing spot for this quarterback that doesn't have the same hype as Arch Manning because his last name is not Manning, but he was ranked just as highly? Or is Arch Manning going to compete for this job? Is this going to be something where there's a bona fide quarterback competition and they both stick it out at Texas? If so, that is such a wild element to watch in the fall of 2023. Which brings up another point that Pete Thamel pointed out there. Again, Pete Thamel, College Football Insider for ESPN. That Arch Manning could redshirt his first year. And that, I think, is very interesting as well. And that it brings in another element of why it's so valuable that he has the Manning family's experience, is because, like he said, Eli Manning redshirted his first year at Ole Miss. His family's not looking for him to start right away, to get on the field freshman year and be number one superstar. Everybody loves Arch Manning. Now, they're looking for the best path for him to make it to the NFL. What is best for him as a person, as a player, as a student, for his development as a quarterback? What sets him up for the most success? So if that is redshirting, then Texas very well could have a quarterback room with Quinn Ewers, who starts in 22 and 23, and then goes on to do whatever, and Arch Manning starts in 2024. So that all I think is just a fascinating part of this is the road to even being the starting quarterback at Texas isn't very clearly paved, which sounds wild that Arch Manning, the number one quarterback in this class, but also the most highly touted quarterback in my lifetime, might not be the obvious bona fide starter, which is wild. So we'll continue to focus on that as well. But coming up next, how does LSU tie into all of this? Because, this is a big story in all of college football, but LSU also plays a role into this, as does the SEC as a whole. So I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Rock Auto. So there are so many different makes and models of cars, and it's almost impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. And so many times when you go and let's say your brakes are having an issue, they're going to ask you all of these questions, your last oil change, what kind of motor or engine does your car need? I'm not a car person and I don't know. So don't endure all of the intimidating questioning and don't waste all of your time waiting while the person behind the counter orders the parts that you need. You have a computer and you have all of the resources that you need. So go to rockauto.com, which you have at home and in your pocket, to get all of the car supplies that you might need. You'll save time and you'll save money when using Rock Auto, because some chain auto parts store, they hike up the price 30%, 50%, or even 100%. So don't waste your money. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, if that's the car that you drive, is $350 on average from a chain store, and it's just over $200 from Rock Auto. So you'll save hundreds with Rock Auto. Plus, the prices are reliably low for every single customer, and it's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. I know I like to support small family-owned businesses, and I'm sure you do too, and you can do that with Rock Auto. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. They've got an amazing selection. They've got reliably low prices, the parts that your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So Arch Manning makes his massive announcement that he is committing to Texas. Now, we've talked about how that looks at the University of Texas, what his entire recruiting process has looked like so far. But there's a really big element here that applies to the SEC and to LSU. This was the absolute best case scenario for LSU and the rest of the SEC. Now, do I think that Arch Manning can live up to the hype? I don't know, because the expectation for Arch Manning is Heisman, national championship, first overall draft pick. That's a really high expectation, especially with a lot of talent coming into college football. So can he live up to the hype? Sure, I think that he can, but he's got massive expectations. And he also has a ton of talent. So Arch Manning going to Texas leaves him in the Big 12 for at least 2023 and 2024 seasons in the Big 12. Now, if Texas and Oklahoma do decide to join the SEC sooner than 2025, that we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But at this point, Arch Manning will not be playing LSU for his first 2 seasons in college football. So assuming that he spends 3, maybe 4 years in college football, if he does decide to take that redshirt year in 23, you're not looking at a very long period of time where Texas is going to be playing LSU, where LSU is going to have to face the number 1 quarterback in the country in the 2023 recruiting class. So I think that is best case scenario. Imagine if you went to Alabama. I mean, that is setting you up for 3 to 4 more years of Alabama having fantastic quarterback play, of Alabama continuing to be at the top of college football because of who was under center, Georgia. Although as constructed, and of course that's subject to change if the schedules decide to change in the SEC. LSU doesn't play Georgia very often, but it's still, let's say LSU does win the West. They conquer the giant Alabama. They win the West. They make it to the SEC championship. They're facing Arch Manning in Georgia in the SEC championship. And then what's your path to a national championship there? So I look at Arch Manning going to Texas, and although Texas is entering the SEC and Arch Manning going to Texas does make that move so much more interesting, I think that it is the best case scenario. And as an LSU fan, you listening, or if you're a fan of another SEC team listening, you can take a big sigh of relief knowing that although there is a ton of talent, there's a boatload of talent in the SEC, there are several other 5-star quarterbacks that could find their way to the SEC if not next year, in the following years. And LSU is going to have so many more quarterbacks coming down the pipe that they're going to have to compete against that are very near the level of talent that Arch Manning is at. But right now, that's not the case. And I mentioned how Arch Manning could make so many other recruits in that class and even in classes moving forward interested in Texas. That's fine because LSU doesn't play Texas. But let's say he goes to Alabama or goes to Georgia. Then there could be several other recruits that are very interested in LSU from the state of Louisiana, committed to LSU, that reopen their commitment to go to Georgia or Alabama and be LSU's immediate competitors rather than a competitor maybe in the college football playoff, if and when both teams get there. So I think best case scenario for LSU fans and also for SEC fans as a whole, at least for the couple of years, that Texas is in the Big 12 and not in the SEC. But Arch Manning, I mean, wow, this has been a topic of conversation on this show, in so many college football discussions that you probably have with your friends, that you probably listen to on podcasts or on the radio or even on sports television shows. This has been wild, absolutely wild to follow this recruitment, and the biggest recruit that in my lifetime. So that's saying something. But that is going to do it for us today. Appreciate y'all for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. You can follow me on Twitter at CarolineFenton1. You can also follow us on Twitter at Locked On LSU. I'll post podcast updates as well as just my thoughts on life, sports, college football, NFL, everything under the sun. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, Locked On LSU. Hit that subscribe button and you won't miss a single second of Locked On LSU content.